very special guest, probably excited for this one. Legendary rugby player Mark Ring played rugby union for Cardiff, Pontypool and Wales between 1982 and 1996. He was regarded as one of the most gifted players of his generation during his career, but his career was hampered by serious injury as well. Mark played more than 250 games for Cardiff and scored 94 tries and 677 points. He played in and won 3 Welsh Cup finals. Although he's a crowd favourite at his home club, he also played for Pontypool as well. Ring also made his senior Wales debut against England as a 20-year-old, went on to gain 32 career international caps between 1983 and 1991. The highlight of his international career came in 1988 when he was part of the Triple Crown winning Welsh side. The majority of his caps were in the centre position, but sometimes he played in his favoured outside half role throughout the 1991 World Cup. He also played in 2 World Cups actually, 1987 and 1991. Wales finished 3rd in 1987, but failed to qualify for their group in 1991, having been defeated by Western Samoa. Mark has also coached at West Hartlepool, Penzance, Newlyn Pirates, Cardiff, Caerphilly and Tetbury RFC, and currently works in the care sector, working with people with a number of conditions ranging from autism through to dementia or anxiety and quite a few other things as well. So today we're going to be chatting about his life, his career, his legendary career, and different aspects of his training, so many things. We've got a lot to cover. So Champ, I just wanted to say a big thank you for coming on. Thank you for making the time. I know you've been very busy today with your care work and with your current career. You move around a bit with that. So thank you very much for hopping on.
No worries.
All right, brilliant. So talking about the care work, I mean, I think that's something that people would be interested to know a little bit about. I saw an interview you gave recently with BBC where you talked a little bit about it. But can you tell us a little bit about what your current role is right now in 2021 and what you're doing with the care work side of things, please?
Yes, my lad, a few years back, he was coming through the rugby ranks and met up with a lad called Chris James, whose son Kane, who's literally just gone to Sedbergh actually, to continue his studies across the water there. 2 talented young rugby lads really, and we used to follow them, and he was telling me a little bit what he was doing. I was at the sort of crossroads of my coaching career and all the rest of it, and he offered me a role in caring, and it's not like a hands-on role where I'm sort of washing people down and dressing people in like that. It's more of a support role whereby I'm sort of providing respite, to people who need it, and just taking them out places or sitting in with them, depending on who they are and sort of what their sort of ailment would be, if you like. There's all kinds of different sort of characters with autism and dementia and anger management, learning difficulties, anxiety. It could be any sort of difficulty they might be sort of living with or whatever. And it's almost like coaching in a way, because it's trying to get to know the person, what makes them happy, trying to it's my company that in my company I'm hoping that they're gonna enjoy their time with me, and I've got to try and find out to get to know them as quick as possible, really, and what makes them tick, what makes them happy. I mean, there's difficulty, there's all types of different strains of autism, if you like, maybe some of the more severe cases would be someone who really struggles with communication, and that's one of the more difficult areas for me, because me trying to work them out and trying to find out how they communicate is very difficult in itself. But it's another sort of challenge that I'm up for, and I really, really enjoy it. It's very rewarding, as well as challenging.
Fantastic. Yeah, it sounds like a very rewarding job, to be fair, and I think it's really wonderful work that you're doing. So it's good to give that a mention for the fans to know what you're doing these days. Now, another thing here is obviously you're one of the greatest players of your generation, and everyone knows that. When you're out and about, with this care role and with some of the things you're doing, do you get stopped in the street and recognized much from that point of view? How is that sort of interaction with the fans nowadays in 2021?
Weirdly, I notice other people much more famous than me. You know, I'm a forgotten man, I suppose, with the man on the street. Obviously, there's some older people, you saw me playing a generation, but I'm old and grey and unassuming when I'm walking about the place, and I'm long forgotten. But I often pop into a small little sort of coffee shop, if you like, in Pontcanna, and I'm the one that's spotting other people, people on the film sets and things like that. So yeah, it's the other way around actually.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, it's good for people to get an insight into what your life is like now. I'm surprised by that, given that what a legend you are and everything you've accomplished. But I can see also how times change. But if we look back a little bit to your career, we'll do that shortly. But I'm just doing a few present day questions because I like to get the point of view of now, today, and the point of view of back in time. So before we go back in time, one more question about the here and now, and this is quite a big one. With regards to how the game has changed from the days when you were playing to how it is now, I know this is a big question, and I don't really have a narrow specific area to focus on. Just wanted to pick your brains really on some of your thoughts of the positives and the negatives of the changes you've seen over the years, be that with coaching or be that with the game itself when you're watching, or any aspect you'd like to share really, and your reflections on that.
Well, obviously the game since professionalism has
Mm,
changed dramatically, um,
yeah.
from from my perspective, from a fan's perspective, an enjoyment perspective. I'm wondering whether it sort of is actually going the wrong way. I mean, obviously rugby league has got its fan base, and rugby union and rugby league, as far as I was always aware, were two very different games.
Mm,
Um, and it appears to me that the rugby union is getting more and more like rugby league because there's a lot more, since the pressure, there's a lot more physicality, athleticism. The guys. I mean, the centre three quarters. I think I was 12 stone 4 when I was first capped, and probably finished my career at around about 14 stone 4, and
mm,
probably half a stone of that was bad weight. But obviously, when you look at some of these centre three quarters now in the game, they could be as heavy as 18 stone. So yeah, that's I think the influence of rugby league coaches at an early time when rugby union just became professional and rugby league was already professional. I think many sort of rugby league players and also rugby league coaches were sort of enticed into the game and influenced the game. Um, I think that is definitely apparent. Um, but I also think that one of the main traits of rugby league, one of the main ingredients really of being a top class rugby league player is defence, because you've got to absorb sort of 6 tackles if you like, and you've got to be able to tackle heavily, and you've got to be trying to disrupt the ball in the tackle, and you've got to be back on your feet and moving back away from the tackle area as quick as you can to make your next tackle, etc., etc. And the ruck area to my eye at the moment is quite similar, and they've been sort of the tacklers at the breakdown have been coached to make a tackle and get to their feet quickly and run away from the tackle. Well, that that is sort of eating up the space. I mean, the defenses at the moment have got probably 4 guys in the backfield, all covered in kicks from different areas, which has taken away, the space for the intricate kick and attack.
mm,
But the advantage that the attackers should have is numerical. If the opposition have got four players in the backfield, then literally they're playing 15 players with the ball against 11 defenders across the game line. So the fact that these guys are getting up and making the tackle and running back into position, it just begs the question of where are all the attack coaches, and why can't they figure out a basic, simple way of overcoming this numerical advantage they got in their favour? Because I'm just not seeing it. I am obviously referring more to the northern hemisphere, and particularly Wales and the regional game in Wales, which is what I watch most. So I would, one of the glaring problems I think in the game at the moment is we haven't got any thinkers. We haven't got anybody who can sort of unlock the defensive patterns that we generally come up against. There's massive sort of copycat coaches who just basically have no thought process. They just look at the game generally and do their best to copy what they see, and that runs down through the youngsters' ranks as well. And there's no sort of development below the senior game. So I think it's a crisis. I think it's a real concern. And there are simple ways to go about it. And if you wanted me to continue with this theory of mine, I mean, it always seems to be a New Zealander in particular, who would sort of find a way of sort of unlocking, some of these defensive patterns. But I'm surprised that nobody in the Northern Hemisphere can actually, work out what they've done, how they've done it, and reciprocate it in the Northern Hemisphere. It's just beggars belief, really. That you'd have to question the standard, the general standard of the coaches in the Northern Hemisphere, and particularly in Wales. The most recent example I can possibly give you would be someone like Jamie Joseph and Andy Ellis, I think it is, in Japan, who, yes, they rolled around the corner from the first breakdown to the second pod carry, if you like. But instead of running close to the rucks and mauls, the first or the second ball carrier would run much wider. So if you consider the defenders across the park are sort of labelled sort of A, B, C, D, for example, instead of the ball carrier running into the A, B channels, they were running wider into the C, D channels. The first person was tipping the ball on to the second runner. The second runner was placing outside, which means if the play was sort of flowing from left to right, then he would place to his outside, to the far sort of touch line, far right-hand touch line. And then the person who's moved the ball onto him has simply run around, looped him, if you like, and then he's straight over the ball. So they can retain the ball with a two-man ruck. They're probably going against two guys that have defended that area. They've also left the A and B defenders redundant, who are not doing anything because they're probably told by their coaches to stay where they are. So the numerical advantage is significantly better. It's gone from 15 against 11 to, let's work out my sums, to probably 13 against 7. And what the Japanese were doing then is passing the ball, to the back line. They weren't confusing anything. They weren't adding any more carries to it. They were just simply, utilising a 13 against 7 numerical advantage, which has actually improved from the initial 15 against 11. Now, that might sound complicated to you, and obviously, Japan didn't win the game. I mean, Ireland won the game because of their raw power. But a side like Japan, to me, certainly from a coaching perspective, has shown a simple, basic method of how the game should be moving forward and how you can exploit a numerical advantage, which in the simplest, most basic terms. They were a delight to watch.
Yeah. Well, it's a brilliant insight there, and there's so many things that I could hone in on and open up, and we'd be here all day if I did. But it's a really, really good insight into it, because it was something I was really looking forward to picking your brains about. That I knew it would be a good answer, but sometimes the answers exceed your expectations, and that's one of them. That's a really, really good insight. So Obviously, taking a look back at your own career is something we need to do as well, because obviously we've talked about how the game is today and a few aspects of that. Now, when we look back on your career, I suppose starting with your debut is probably a good place to start. I mean, you debuted as an 18-year-old and with Cardiff RFC as well, and it was brilliant. Now, this many years later, what do you remember about that in your own words? Because I could ask sort of something specific about the game, but I'm more interested in your own memories, this many years later, of when it all started for you and what your reflections are on that, of, anything you'd like to share with us.
Well, yes, I was still a youth player. I was the captain of Cardiff Youth. I played the year before. I was the captain the following year. So we played a youth cup final at Caerphilly at Virginia Park. We Cardiff Youth had just won the cup final. We beat Newport Youth in the final. And Cardiff RFC, I think they must have had a few unavailabilities or a few injuries or whatever. It was like like an end of season trip away to the south of France, and they asked me to come and make up the numbers in the squad. We played a game over in the south of France against Côte de Basque, which was a select team from the Basque region in Biarritz, and we had an injury at half time, and they gave me my debut at half time as fly half. So the fullback, Glyn Davis, he went off injured. Julian O'Brien, who was the fly half, who started, he went back to fullback, and then they brought me on and played me at fly half. So it was quite. I mean, confidence wise, I felt extremely confident. But you just don't, until you get out there, you don't really realize, the difference between being a youth player and a senior player almost overnight. There was no bedding in for me. There was no. I think I remember. I think one of my first touches was I saw space in behind the what I thought was the right wing, and I've scuffed my kick. It's gone straight to him, and he's run 60 yards the other way, and we've scrambled him into touch on the corner flag. So, my first touch was poor. It turns out that player was Serge Blanco, who'd never been capped at the time and was literally unheard of in Wales. But he scored 3 tries on the day, and they beat us comfortably, like 26 points to 3 or something like that. And it wasn't, to be truthful, it wasn't a great debut. I was probably, would you call it trying too hard? Who knows? But there's no. There's the self-composure, the time on the ball. It just doesn't feel the same in your first game in senior rugby, and it does take a couple of games to bed in. And I suppose from that perspective, I think I was far more confident the next time I played against. I think it was Glamorgan Wanderers, at Glamorgan Wanderers, on an evening game, a midweek game, and yeah, I was far more, just for the experience of playing against a top class French region, away from home. The experience was there. It was in the bank, and I was fortunate, to play 12 first team games that year. It just turned out that most of those games then weren't in my favourite position as fly half, because I had opportunities to play with Gareth Davis, Teddy Holmes. They were the established halfbacks at the time, so they tried me in the fullback role initially, and I didn't like it. I had no real sort of help from a coaching perspective, in terms of angles and where I should be stood and everything else. So I remember being hopelessly out of position against Bath, playing fullback on the Arms Park the one day, and a guy, John Horton, England international, put a cross kick over to a flyer called David Trick. Some people might remember back in that, certainly the Bath players, where he was an absolute flying machine, and he caught the ball and canted in, and I was about 25 yards away from him. It was almost embarrassing, and the referee actually gave him offside, because they thought he must have been in front of the kicker. Well, I know for a fact he wasn't in front of the kicker. The fact was, I was so far out of position, he probably looked a bit ridiculous that he had so much time on the ball. But that was my fault. So I didn't like playing fullback. so they found a position for me in the centre, and never looked back. I loved it. I loved playing left centre or right centre, particularly. Formed a great fruitful combination with Alan Donovan, who we'd signed from Swansea, and he was a more of a calming influence. Very strong. His basic skills were very, very strong, but most of all, he was composed and calm. And where I was a bit sort of overconfident and almost daft on occasions, he would be the man that would sort of calm me down, settle me down, and ensure that I'm playing with the right head on for the team. And yeah, he was a huge influence on me.
Incredible, incredible. So another great insight. Is wonderful to share, some of these memories with people from your own perspective. Now, another thing, obviously, with your time playing for Cardiff, I mean, you played a lot of games with Cardiff. You had a lot of achievements there. In terms of your proudest moments from that time of your career, because I was thinking about this when I was doing the research, I was thinking, we could focus on this game, that game, but there were a lot of them, and there was a lot that happened. So, of that sort of phase of your career with Cardiff, what were your personal proudest moments that you look back on now in the fondest sense, if you get where I'm coming from?
Without doubt, the proudest moment, would have been, my first cap. On the Arms Park against England, singing the anthem. My family had been up in the stand, actually looking for them, and seeing my mum next to my dad. Obviously, that was my proudest moment. There's no question about that. But because it's a culmination, and it's the reward for all the unseen sort of moments where you're road running on Christmas Day because you think your opposite number somewhere in the world might be sitting around having Christmas dinner, and when there was like I think there was a time, there was 1 year when it was about, I don't know, 3 foot of snow, and finding a time to get out there and go on a 3-mile run through the snow, and the times when I'm on my own with a rugby ball, and for hours and hours and hours on end, I've been used to jump over the fence at where Cardiff Met is now, and use their pitch, and kick the ball around the pitch, left foot, right foot. Reading about Gary Player when he said the more you practice, the luckier you get. I remember practicing left-footed drop goals, and then lo and behold, the following week the ball drops to me, and I slotted a left-footed drop goal. And these things, he couldn't be more right in what he was saying. And it's the culmination of all these things, and the support you've had from your parents, and your close friends and your family, and you actually go out and fulfill the dream, just to get that that opportunity to represent your country, which is bestowed on us, and it was just incredible, really. But I must say, it was a disappointment as well, because the game didn't go to plan at all. So I think I just touched the ball about 4 times in the entire match. We drew. We scrambled the win in the end. Again, I showed my inexperience by sort of ball watching, being called ball watching, where they've sent the ball in the wider areas, and John Carlton scored an early try for England, and I couldn't really get into the game. It was definitely again a tough experience, but still, to answer your question, by far the proudest moment.
Wonderful, and it's really good as well, because I love to get into the things that the fans don't see, because obviously there's aspects of the game that you experience which, from the outside looking in, you don't see. And yeah, mentioning all the sacrifices that are made, I think that's wonderful, and it's great advice. There's some great advice in there for any young players watching this as well, which I always like to give that meaning in these interviews as well. Now, obviously, there was a period of time here where you left Cardiff, you joined Pontypool, and there was a situation there. I'd like to touch on that briefly, and then we can get to obviously playing internationally and at different levels. But touching on Pontypool a little bit, now I know you have talked about this in some interviews, but the story behind that decision, I think is quite an interesting story. So do you mind sharing that with us a little bit about what happened there, please?
Not sure. I was just I was just living at home. I was a civil servant. I went into the civil service simply because it was a job I picked up almost immediately from school. I had a huge disappointment in not making the Wales schools set up because they said I was too small. And then I thought, well, let's go down the Welsh youth route, which meant if you want to represent the Welsh youth, you've got to go through. You've got to be in work. So yeah, I was a Welsh youth player, and then I obviously joined Cardiff, from the youth system, and the first job I took was as a civil servant in Company's House, Department of Trade and Industry, and I was there for about 8 years. And during that 8 years, I'm sort of involved with Cardiff, and I'm seeing players coming and going and being made a lot of fuss of, and there's stories about so and so being given a rent-free accommodation and a lovely flat overlooking like Lander Fields or whatever, and then other players being given some lucrative jobs in sales with cars and everything else. And I just came to that conclusion that the money I was earning, I know it was an amateur game, but certain people were being sort of helped out financially, and not necessarily directly by the club, but through their sponsors and things like that. So obviously, Cardiff Rugby Club has always been a very, very strong amateur club before professionalism sort of kicked in. So there was a time just after I left Company's House that I more or less decided I'm going to, try and, make some sort of a strong financial career for myself through contacts with rugby. And the obvious place to start was London. And London Welsh, was the obvious starting place, with the Welsh connections there. So I spent 3 days in London. I'd already made up my mind that I was leaving Cardiff. I went London Welsh introduced me to a lad who took me into an office, so they could provide me with a printout of my own sort of profile, which came back as the social sector. I would be perfect in the social sector. Now, ironically, that's exactly what I'm doing now. I'm doing caring, which is very much a part of the social sector. But the idea at the time, a member who actually designed the course in one of the universities, and he was going to help me personally to get through this 4-year course in 1 year, and then at the end of it, I would be qualified to run a leisure centre, for example, and that's going to be the next sort of stage of my career. And I thought, this is fantastic. Let's go down this avenue. And there was always something nagging me in the back of my mind, you know what I mean? If, out the sight, out the mind, going to London and all the rest of it. So after a few days and met all the right guys, I came back, and David Bishop, who was a tremendous rugby player, as we all know, he approached me and said, look, I heard you've just come back from London, you're leaving Cardiff, what's going on? And I explained the situation, and he said, well, come up to Pontypool for a session. I came at the Pontypool. I jogged over the grotto with all the players. It's this sort of famous two big hills, you have to run over, as part near the ski slope. And I was sort of surrounded by committee men after the game. They took me into an office and talked to me about the game, and I could team up with Bish and play number 10, which was always my favourite position, and link up and form this halfback partnership. And they would tell me about the fan base, and I think there must have been about 250 people watching the training session, and it just blew me away. And I just thought, well, this is some sort of sleeping giant. So just on a whim. I just signed there and then. It just got me. I had absolutely no intention whatsoever of signing for Pontypool. And then after one training session, we lost 2 games in the entire season, and won 20 odd games away from home against some of the toughest opposition in the UK and Ireland. Your Munsters, your Gloucesters away on a Tuesday night. We just a phenomenal season, and one I always look back on fondly and share great memories of.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, obviously, another thing to come to here, moving on from Pontypool, because it's a great story about what happened there and the ups and downs of that. But your international debut, as well, playing for Wales itself here in the early 80s, 1983, I believe. We need to touch on that a little bit, because that is another thing that I can imagine is obviously a tremendous good feeling for you. It's a tremendous achievement, obviously. Now, it's the same sort of thing as when we were talking about your debut. I mean, I'd like to get into what you remember about that, about playing internationally for Wales, reaching that level, how it felt at the time. Anything you'd like to share, really, whether it's on the build up to it or whether it's on the the debut itself. I don't mind, but it's what sort of sticks in your mind about that aspect? This many years later, an incredible achievement like that.
Well, there's a lot of people. I read a lot of things in the press about how I was unfortunate. I would have had so many more caps if I hadn't had this knee injury. Right, I had 2 knee injuries. One was to my left leg in '85. It was the last game for Cardiff of the season at home against Swansea. I was out for 11 months with an anterior cruciate medial massive dislocation, meniscus. It was a massive injury, which in fairness to Cardiff, they helped me with. I got operated on there and then, but within 3 hours of the match, I was operated on. You look at the health service today, and it's God knows how long you have to wait, but that's down to the connection at Cardiff. So ever so grateful to them. But all I read is how many more caps you'd have had if it wasn't for this knee injury. Now, I'd only had 4 caps at that point, so I had another 28 after that. So I did have to sort of change to a certain level. Pace wise, I lost. It took a bit of an edge off me pace wise, and I became more of a second 5/8, as opposed to an inside centre. I don't like to call it inside. I always prefer to call centre 3/4 who like to hit up at first phase and run into traffic at first phase, or set up rucks, or whatever you want to call it. I like to call them inside centres. I like to call a position I played when I did stand at inside centre, if you like, second 5/8, because to me it was always like a secondary playmaker to the number 10, who was the first 5/8. So that's sort of how I try to develop my game. Learned more about it by being well beaten by fantastic New Zealand teams, further down the line, and I felt I became very good at it. But getting back to your question, through the Welsh career, it was probably before I had the knee injury. I was just saying. Actually, before the knee injury would have been to answer to get back to your question. Really, it was the first. Even though I sort of had a decent enough career, after the knee injury, like you say, 28 more caps, if you like. It was probably my third and fourth, certainly my third cap against Scotland, which was the one where I really sort of knew I was at home in the Welsh shirt. My first cap was obviously the draw, which I touched on. It wasn't the greatest experience. How to say greatest experience, but bit of an anticlimax, I suppose, was the first cap, and then the second cap It was against Australia when they won the Grand Slam. They had this fantastic team, but I played for Cardiff that year, and we'd beaten them on the tour. So to lose 28-9 in the Test match was a huge disappointment. So that was the second cap. So the third cap then was Scotland. Was Scotland at Murrayfield, and I was determined to go out and show people what I could do, because I did on at the international level, and I felt I did that. I did have a storming game, and the other game that same season then was against France. France in Parc des Princes, and another very good game in broken play in that game as well. So it was that part of my career really, which was I mean, I was actually player of the year that year as well. So, and it was the end of that season that I picked up the injury against Swansea, which obviously certainly, like I said, changed the way I had to play when I returned from that. But I remember being in plaster. The leg was in plaster on crutches, receiving the Rugby Writers Wales Rugby Player of the Year award. And Ian Evans, a great friend of mine, Ian, he was the Young Player of the Year. So I've still got a photograph with Ian and I receiving our respective trophies in the 85-86 season. But what was the 84-85 season? Whichever one it was. So that was the real sort of proud moment. Really, that's the one I recall the most. That particular season, we didn't win. It was in '88 that we won the Grand Slam, and we got touched off 10-9 against France for the Triple Crown, and we lost 10-9 against France for the Grand Slam at home. That was a huge disappointment, but that was a great season. We played a lot of good running rugby then, but it was the '85 season where I was really I actually felt at home for the first time in a Welsh shirt, and really part of their, one of their top players, So that would be it. I think that would be the answer to your question.
Very much, brilliant answer to it as well. And I'm glad we got some of the injuries in there, because I had questions about that as well. But it's a good overview of that phase of your career. And obviously, another one you mentioned here. Moving on with just a couple more phases of your career to finish up on that. Obviously, the 2 World Cups you took part in need to have a mention here. I mean, we can't be leaving them out by any means, and that's. Whether it's the pinnacle, I don't know, but it's certainly a pinnacle of your career, an incredible achievement. Now, with these sorts of things, in the same vein, we've been following along nicely with your recollections of it. So it's pretty much the same sort of question to reminisce a little bit about that, because there's different aspects of this that I could hone in on with the different teams you played against, or the different aspects. But again, with your own personal recollections, that's flowing very well. So in the same sort of vein as that, champ, with the 2 World Cups, what are your memories of those? Again, be it the build-up, be it the games themselves, anything that you'd like to share with us this many years on that you remember fondly about that?
The first World Cup was, it always felt like, obviously, the inaugural World Cup was the very first one certainly since professionalism. And it did always have that feel of, let's kickstart it. It was not an afterthought or whatever, but the very first one is almost like a test. Let's test it out. Let's use it as a test to see if this is something we're going to move forward with. It always had that feel about it. South Africa weren't in it because of political reasons. So that took a slight sort of edge off it, and it was still very much part of the amateur era as well. So we felt as a group of players, the Welsh team felt that we were on a budget. The places we trained in, the way we trained, it was still very, very amateur. When we went over there, we were staying in sort of cheap motels, as opposed to what will they do now? This World Cup, they'll send Alan Phillips out with a group of guys, and they will look at all the training facilities. They will look at the top class hotels. They will do everything in their power to make sure that the players are. All you got to do is concentrate on the rugby and everything else, but not back then. We were, we were making our own fun. We were very much on a budget. There's no question about that. And what remains mine, this is the fact that we finished third in the inaugural World Cup. So no team has achieved what we achieved in 1987. But it has to be tempered with the fact that it was the first one, and the tournament has obviously gone bigger and better and gone from strength to strength. So let's make no bones about that one. I finished after the second one. We were home. That was on sort of home soil, if you like. I think the final was played at Twickenham, but we played all our group games in Cardiff. And Alan Davis had taken over, and we'd lost a lot of players after the '88 World Cup. So the '91 World Cup, we were almost in sort of rebuilding mode. It almost came around too quickly for us, because having won the Triple Crown in '88, you'd like to think and we'd like to think we're building nicely for the '91 World Cup with all our group games in Cardiff, and a lot of those players, they went to rugby league after the disastrous tour of New Zealand in '88. So it was a difficult one for us, and Alan Davis had no long taken over, and he was sort of tasked with trying to rebuild the side and job things and patch things as quickly as we could and get some sort of pride back in time for the '91 World Cup. And he gave me the opportunity to play fly half, which was fantastic. It was really I felt it was my time. But again, the final build up to our last warm up game, if you like, before the first game in the group, was against France, and we beat France, and I played fly half, and I played well, and I still got a letter that he sent me saying what a great start I'd made, and he had every faith in me, every confidence in me. But I went off in the game, and my cartilage had gone in the other knee, and they to get me to recover, they sent me to a rehabilitation centre in Brecon, and I spent 3 weeks having rehab in and out of a pool, and having all sorts of massage on the knee and everything else, and had the operation done straight away. And it was a situation where he felt that with my experience, as long as my knee was structurally sound, I was gonna play all the games in the World Cup starting 10. But the first one, I found it easy enough. We beat Argentina, and then we got beat against Samoa, and then obviously there was a lot of stick. I missed the goal kicks. I played quite well. If people look back on the game, I set up a try. I think it was for Ryan in the corner, and we lost by a score or whatever. But if you look at the game, I'd take the blame for missing the goal kicks, but I wouldn't take the blame for playing when I was injured, because my knee just hold up structurally. But we didn't. We got smashed in the loose. The Samoans were way too more physical for us up front. They were the real reasons why we lost the game. And then once you're once you're in this position where you have to beat Australia to qualify out of the group, then the pressure really kicks in, outside the group. And I think we won about 2 lineouts in the entire match against Australia. And in the last sort of 20 minutes of the game, that's what I felt it. And it wasn't to do with the knee. It was the fact that I'd been sat on a treatment bench for 3 weeks and then didn't need preparation. So I played 2 games, and then the third one in the group, my legs felt like, as if they weren't there. It was like felt like jelly. I felt slow. I felt lethargic. And of course, Australia were at the top of their game. David Campese was right on top of his game. They beat us comfortably, and we failed to qualify. And then a lot of stick. I was getting phone calls, messages left on my phone, abusive messages and all the rest of it. And I just thought, well, I can't. I'm done with this. And I decided to retire from international rugby after the second World Cup. Given I had 2 serious knee operations and a cartilage operation as well to top it all, it was probably the right thing to do from an international perspective to prolong my career as a rugby player at club level.
Yeah, it is, again, it's an amazing insight, and I know I'm saying that, but it's with a few questions, but it's a really thorough insight into what happened. And again, it's great for the fans. It's definitely ups and downs in that time. I think it's one aspect of your career that's remembered most is, that phase. Now, another thing the last couple of things to touch on, because I mean, we've gone in depth here and we've covered some good stuff. Obviously, at that time, I asked you earlier about, being recognized on the street and everything, these days. Obviously, at that time, it was a whole different thing. And, you were a hero to all of us, to so many people, and you still are. But that's why I was surprised at the answer earlier where you said about not getting so much of that. But regardless.
I'm 58 years of age, that's why.
Well, yeah, but, but your achievements and everything like that, I don't know. I mean,
with grey hair and glasses.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, champ. You're doing well. I mean, it's one of
And
those
mix
things,
into the
right?
crowd well.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's what it is. But when we think back to how it was at that time of your career, in terms of being known by everybody, this is one that's a little bit outside the box, because it might seem obvious that you were very well known at that time. But I'm still curious what it was like, in your own experience, like I say, being known by everybody, being stopped in the street, being recognizable like that. How did you handle that process at the time in your career? Did you enjoy it? Were you nervous about it? What was the experience sort of like for you being that famous, that many years ago? If you get where I'm coming from with this.
Yeah, well, I always enjoyed it. Yeah, I always had time for people. So long as it was all happy banter. The ones. What I would struggle with is if like some negative guy is just coming and just looking for an argument. You always come across those type of people, but I remember because it was an amateur. Because it was an amateur game, we could always go out and have a beer, but we were never really sort of, the adulation didn't, it didn't. It's not like it would be today, where players are almost sort of kept off the streets, and do everything, have their enjoyment in privacy, really, almost. But you could be out there, in the public eye, and as long as you didn't do anything daft, behave yourself, we would enjoy it. And I remember there'd be like a famous sort of nightclub right next to the Arms Park, called Jackson's, and they used to have like a VIP area, and sometimes the Wales football lads were in town, and the Welsh rugby lads and the Welsh football lads would all be mingling together up in God rest his soul. I remember Gary Speed and Mark Hughes and Ian Rush and the young Ryan Giggs and all John Hart. All these players would have been like we've been rubbing shoulders with, and I'm still quite pally with Kevin Radcliffe today, so yeah, these the times were good, enjoyable.
Yeah, it's a good insight into a little bit of a different aspect that again people don't necessarily see now unless you were there then. So the people there then will remember it, but it gives us a feel these days for what it was like. So the last couple of things, because like I say, we have gone really in depth, and I appreciate your time with going in depth through all of this, by the way. So the last couple of things, obviously, the coaching side of things. Now, you've coached at a number of clubs yourself, and when I was researching this, I actually didn't realize it was as many as it is. But you've been quite outspoken, with regard to the coaching aspect as well, in the past. And obviously, I know when we were planning this, we talked about this. I saw on your LinkedIn, there's an outspoken statement on there, and I do respect people who are outspoken, for the right reasons. So I'd like to sort of touch upon that, about some of the corruption that you talk about that goes on in the coaching side of things, if this is not too controversial territory to sort of veer into. So let's touch a little bit on that, just on some of your thoughts of what's happening with that side of things. Because and just for our fans as well, I've got notes here. You've also obviously coached for West Hartlepool, Penzance, Newlyn Pirates, obviously Cardiff, Caerphilly, and Tetbury RFC. Have I missed any with that? Because I didn't, like I say, to be 100% honest, I didn't know it was as many. You've coached for a good few clubs.
There was a little team in the Cotswolds called Tetbury. I played and coached for them as well when I was St Albans, Old Alcidians. Yeah, so there for a very short time recently. But, Glamorgan, the University of South, University of Glamorgan. What is it called now? The University of South Wales or something. Yeah, I've always loved coaching. So I coach for free, and I coach for money if I'm offered money. So yeah, it's something I've always enjoyed.
Yeah, that's wonderful, though. I mean, you're giving back to the next generation, and
I like helping others. I love it when I can give the benefit of my experience and someone benefits for it and grows in confidence or improves a skill or some tactic that might come off or something where we're problem solving at half time or a critical substitution, and it's what I like doing, and I've always coached for the individual first, and I've always coached for the team first. And I've always, in my personal opinion, always retained a massive amount of knowledge and, thought outside the box. And people might say, well, he's bitter and twisted, when he slags somebody else off, or, as a go at the coaching, the standard of coaching or whatever, he's bitter and twisted. Well, I say, well, I am bitter and twisted. I am bitter and twisted because, I've been part of a corruptive situation where I know that people have genuinely been afraid almost of my the amount of knowledge that I retain, and there are too many people in the game who don't coach for the team, they coach for themselves first, and they're more interested in their own wage packets. I've never feared the sack. It's inevitable in a professional game. And whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong, I always stand by my decisions because they're in the best interest of the rugby club or the best interest of the individual. And it's all about don't fear losing, because once you get it right, once the whole thing comes together, results generally they take care of themselves. But to me, I've witnessed individuals forming groups around themselves, to protect their own interests, right? And that's out there. That's happening. There's a guy. I mean, it's probably not right, to name names, but I applied for a job. I applied for a job in in a university, coaching a college team, and I knew the brother of the procurement manager, and he said to me that I didn't make the shortlist, and when he told me the guys that were on the shortlist, there were 3 guys with really credible CVs, and one guy who was basically who had no sort of rugby background whatsoever, and previously he was given a job. He was given a high-profile job by a guy who was connected with the Welsh Rugby Union, who couldn't. It was like a conflict of interest that the guy from the Welsh Rugby Union could coach the club side because he was in part of the development of the game. So because he couldn't do the job, he brought somebody in with little or no experience to volunteer almost to become sort of director of rugby, if you like. And then this fella he ended up on the shortlist for this. Having been sacked from the rugby club, he's gone to this college and basically got the job. And when I found out how he got the job, it was the guy from the Welsh Rugby Union with his Welsh Rugby Union hat on that went and told him to give the job to him. And he's still there to this day. And that's just one incident. You know, there's just been, I don't want to bore you with it all, but you know, it does get you down when the people in the Welsh Rugby Union probably to this day wouldn't even be aware of it, because the ones who make the decisions are too high up, but below them, they've got sinister characters like this that can use their WRU status to get away with it. And you know, I'd stand up in court and name names if I have to, if anyone, you know, if it ever got to that. But you know, I often feel that you know, some of these characters have got together and held me back from, you know, coaching at the level I should be at.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I know we I think I mentioned this briefly when we spoke on the phone when we were planning this, but it was something I really wanted to give you the chance to sort of put out there in the open, and I know you do anyway, but you know, it's good for any viewers of this to sort of know what's going on. Maybe people that are not aware or whatever. It's a good one to mention. Now, like I say, we've been running in depth, and we've, you know, it's going really well. So the last couple of things, champ, because obviously I'm mindful of your time and trying to be respectful of your time. So the last 2 things is, one of them would like to give your son a mention, because obviously he's playing rugby now. He's following in your footsteps, I believe. And could you just share a little bit about his career development, how he's doing, you know, what your involvement is?
No, I can't, because he's given up the rugby. He's gone to football. Yeah. And as it happens this week, he's on trial with Cardiff City. So we'll see which way he goes with that. So he's he was involved with the Cardiff Blue. He was with the Cardiff, the starting fly half of the Cardiff schoolboys under 15s. It came at a difficult time because obviously COVID paid to that. I think they were in the semi-finals and fairly strong favourites to win the Jewish Shield, but that didn't go ahead. And then he was involved with the Blues 16s group, but he was always going down the football route. And somebody in the Blues who's probably connected to some of the guys I touched on just now, you know, axed him from the final 45, which was like pretty much tipped him over the edge. Really. He was going down the football route anyway, but if there was any sort of a final doubts about the football, whether he had a chance to go in the rugby route, then that put paid to that. So he's just done exceptionally well in both really, football and rugby. But unfortunately, you know, some of again going back to the coaching, I watched him play, and they, from a fly-off's perspective, where he could get his head up and find space, I just felt that they're almost turning him into a pivot, you know, where he'd be standing off in the fly-off position and then a pod of three would be on his shoulder, and then he'd have to hit them up and then go the same way. And sometimes I say, why didn't you exploit the space going back in the opposite direction? And he would say, well, I'm not allowed that. So, it's not, it's just another example really the lack of quality development, behind the scenes.
Very much, yeah, very, very much. Well, firstly, I wish him very well with the football side of things. I mean, if that's the area he wants to go down, then it's really good to give that a mention. But it is unfortunate about the other aspect, what's going on there. But at least we've had the chance to get that out in the open and everything. So, the last question is pretty much the last thing I have here is another big one, because I know you've coached at quite a few places, so you've passed on a lot of advice. But you've learned a lot of lessons in your career, and some of them the hard way by the sound of it. So if people, young athletes, young players, they want to learn from you, obviously they can probably approach you or whatever. But if there's any young players who are watching this who want to get some advice from an all-time great like yourself, and I stand by that, despite how much you do or don't get recognized these days. But what would be sort of two or three key pieces of advice that you give them? There's probably too much to mention, because there'd be so much, but maybe two or three key ingredients. Maybe if it's on the business side, if it's on the actual playing side, you get where I'm going.
I mean, obviously, you mustn't fear, making a mistake. I don't, if you know you've got enough in the bank, to get you through, to get you to the standard you're at, skills wise, you will make mistakes, but hopefully the quality you bring will soon put the mistakes you made to the back of the mind of the supporter. So you need to play with confidence, and don't fear anything. I think that's very, very important. What you looking for me to ask is about two or three, is it?
Well, it's it doesn't. I don't mind. It's just anything that you regard as really important.
I think, from a younger age, I think I was very, very lucky, even though I was never really coached at the younger age, in the late sort of 60s, if you like, early 70s, not by any proper, or what we call renowned coaches. They were just all volunteers. I mean, mostly like it is today in a sense, but at the younger age grades. But you hear inside backs, for example, fly halves, 12s, whatever, yeah, and they get told to scan. The word scan comes up time and time again. Well, I just think, by saying the word scan, I think it's just a case of just, it doesn't explain clearly and logically how the player can be a player with vision. It's probably one of the hardest things to coach, vision, but nobody ever used the word scan to me. It was always count. The word count would be far more important. So, for example, like I can remember back when I was a very young lad in the late 60s, that I was playing in a fly-out position, and they stopped the game, and the ball was at the base of a rock or whatever, and the scrum halves would have passed me the ball, and the coach just came over. He said, "Like, blew the whistle." He said, "Stand still." So he said to me, "What? How many can you count?" So I looked up in front of me, and I'm sort of looking for some guidance. He said, "Well, the opposition." So I said, "Oh, there's three." He said, "So how many have you got?" I said, "Well, there's 1, 2, and me. That's 3." He said, "So how are you going to make more than they've got?" I went, looked around. He said, "Well, where are you looking?" So he said, "Well, look on your inside. How many are there?" I said, "Well, 2." So he said, "Okay, well, get those 2 down there then." So now you've got a 5. Now you've got a 5 on 3. And, it was then, looking where the space is in the backfield. And he was looking over your shoulder to see how you can utilise the fullback coming in the line, and where he's going to stand. And, and it was all count. So you had to head up, count what's in front of you defensively, head on your inside, head on your outside, head behind you. Yes, that's scanning. the word scan is a rubbish word, I think, because players will understand that they're scanning anyway by counting. It's all about counting. So my advice to younger players, if you like, making their way, you know, I've seen Dan Bigger's head going up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, but that's no good. If his head's going up, down, inside, outside, behind him, that's what you're looking for, in a player. If I'm watching a football match, before the ball comes, quick, you see their heads moving quickly. They're looking before they receive the ball, and these inside backs need to be seeing things before they get the ball in the same way, only in a rugby match, not a football match. I think that's huge. And then the last thing I would say is, from a very young age, your skills, your stepping, your footwork, throwing a dummy, how you transfer your weight when you pass the ball, cut out all these spin passes. You haven't got to run straight to pass long. You can if you're passing a long pass from left to right, put your left leg across your right leg, if you like. So you're actually moving more you're transferring your weight from left to right, like almost cocking your left leg over your right to roll a left-handed spin pass off, because you haven't got to run straight to pass along when the guy's already in the space. It's all about the pass accuracy. And when you're passing orthodox, swing underneath and just help it along, just nudge the ball to the space. Cut out the spin passes, pass and move. And everything you do on your left side, do on your right side, kicking wise. How to hold the ball. I mean, skills. But unfortunately, I'm not sure if they're getting much in the way of knowledge. To help them with some of the techniques. We hope all that changes, obviously.
I hope so. I mean, it's a brilliant thing, because obviously with your coaching and with what you do, you can work with people directly. But with this sort of interview in the digital space, then that advice can hopefully reach a little bit further and maybe filter down into some young minds, and obviously put them on the right track. But mate, we've been through a lot of stuff. I mean, we've gone very in depth with all this, which I'm well happy about, and that's a good thing. And I'm being 100% honest when I say this has sort of exceeded my expectations. I mean, I knew it would be a good talk, but it's we've gone in depth into some really good things. So I do appreciate your time very much, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule, and how busy you are to make the time for this. So that really the last thing for me to say is obviously just a big thank you for that. I appreciate you making the time.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.